You think the Roman Colosseum was just about heroic gladiators locked in honorable combat? That's the version carved into marble and painted on postcards. A sanitized myth. The truth was far darker, more calculated, and far more cruel. Imagine standing in the crowd, the midday sun burning overhead. The sand beneath your sandals already stained a deep rust tread. The cheers are deafening, but the man stepping into the arena is no trained warrior. He's a prisoner, a condemned slave. He's not here to fight for glory. He's here to die for your entertainment. And the worst part is the death itself isn't even the main attraction. It's the suffering, the humiliation, the drawn-out spectacle of pain that Rome perfected into an art form. The Colosseum wasn't just an arena, it was a machine for manufacturing fear. Every scream, every execution, every staged mythological killing was a message. A warning to anyone thinking of defying Rome's order. They didn't just kill people here. They turned killing into theater, into something so elaborate that you couldn't look away. What you're about to hear isn't the story told in classrooms or tourist brochures. This is the Colosseum stripped of its marble mask, raw, brutal, and drenched in the politics of power. And once you see it for what it truly was, you can't unsee it. To understand the blood games of the Colosseum, you have to understand the Rome that built it. By the end of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents. Its armies had crushed kingdoms, enslaved millions, and filled its coffers with the spoils of conquest. But empires aren't held together by swords alone. They reheld together by spectacle, by grand displays of power that remind both citizens and subjects who is in control. The Colosseum, or Amphitheatrum Flavium, was the crown jewel of that spectacle. Commissioned by Emperor Vespasian around 70 AD and completed by his son Titus. It was a marvel of engineering, stone, concrete, and genius craftsmanship, rising 48 meters high. It could hold 50,000 to 80,000 spectators, all funneled in through 80 entrances, their excitement swelling with every step toward the arena floor. The games, or munera, were originally rooted in ancient funeral rites, a grim offering of blood to honor the dead. But under the emperors, evolved into something far larger. State-sponsored events meant to entertain the masses and glorify imperial power. Gladiator combats were only the beginning. By midday, the focus often shifted to Naxi, criminals, prisoners of war, political enemies, whose punishment would be carried out in front of tens of thousands. These midday spectacles were called ludi meridiani, and they were designed not only to kill, but to degrade. The condemned might be forced to reenact scenes from mythology, but with a twist. In these performances, the deaths were real. A man cast as Orpheus would be torn apart by wild beasts. A woman playing Dano might be exposed to predators while chained, her suffering paraded as entertainment. The state's motives were layered. On the surface, it was about giving the public bread and circuses, free grain, and lavish games to keep them loyal and distracted. But underneath, it was about control. The crowd wasn't just watching a death. They were being reminded of the state's absolute power over life itself. Every execution sent a message. Rome's law was unshakable. Defiance meant obliteration, not just of your body, but of your dignity. Even the architecture of the Colosseum reinforced this. The emperor's box occupied the most prominent position, elevated above the arena. Every eye could see him, and he could see every drop of blood spilled in his name. Senators, priests, and elite families filled the front rows, their presence a public endorsement of the violence. The poor, the slaves, and the commoners sat higher up. Yet they too were part of the ritual, their cheers fueling the machine. Ancient historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio wrote of emperors who went to extremes to outdo their predecessors. Exotic animals, lions, leopards, elephants, even crocodiles, were imported from Africa and Asia to be unleashed upon the condemned. Entire forests would be reconstructed inside the arena for a single event, or mock naval battles would be staged by flooding the floor. The games were not a casual diversion. They were a colossal investment in propaganda. Each drop of blood another brick in the wall of imperial authority. And it worked. The people of Rome and the provinces beyond revered the emperors who staged the grandest games. Titus, who inaugurated the Colosseum with 100 days of continuous spectacles, cemented his image as a generous ruler. Yet in the shadows of that image lay the corpses of thousands, nameless, voiceless, forgotten, save for the crimson stains on the sand. The Colosseum was a paradox, a place of awe and horror, glory and degradation. It reflected Rome itself, magnificent, ruthless, and unrelenting. As we step deeper into its bloody history, the next chapter reveals the heart of its cruelty, the punishments themselves, crafted not just to end lives, but to imprint terror on the soul of an empire. By midday in the Colosseum, the mood shifted. The roar of the crowd that greeted gladiators gave way to a different kind of anticipation. Darker, sharper, and more bloodthirsty. This was the hour of the ludi meridiani, the executions. And here, Rome revealed the most calculated and theatrical forms of punishment the ancient world had ever devised. One of the most infamous methods was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. The condemned, stripped of armor, and often of dignity, would be thrust into the arena to face lions, leopards, or bears. Sometimes they were armed with nothing but a wooden staff or a dagger barely large enough to cut bread. More often, they were given nothing at all. The purpose was never a fair fight. It was the spectacle of inevitability, the thrill of watching nature and Rome's authority devour human life. But the cruelty didn't stop with the animals. Roman executioners often wove these punishments into elaborate mythological reenactments. The stories of the gods and heroes so familiar to the audience were retold with living victims. A man playing Icarus might be hoisted high into the air before being dropped to his death. Another cast as Prometheus could be chained to a rock, his flesh exposed to trained birds of prey. These scenes blurred the line between theater and execution, forcing the crowd to watch as fiction became flesh. The devices used were equally varied and ingenious. There were concealed mechanisms beneath the arena floor, trapdoors that could suddenly open, releasing a charging beast or dropping a victim into a pit. Lifts and winches allowed for sudden appearances of elaborate props, or even entire stages for specific tortures. In one account, prisoners were bound inside hollow bronze statues of animals, then burned from within to create a gruesome spectacle that seemed, from the stands, like a mythical creature roaring in pain. Public humiliation was another crucial part of these punishments. The condemned might be dressed in absurd costumes, painted with garish colors, or forced to parade before the crowd while gears rained down. In some cases, they were compelled to fight one another, untrained, terrified, and desperate, simply to prolong the suffering before the final blow. Why such theatricality? Because the games were never just about killing. They were about sending a message. Every scream, every stumble, every hopeless glance upward toward the emperor's box reinforced the same lesson. Rome's power was absolute. It could create beauty and it could create horror, and often it chose to mix the two. Even the pacing of these events was deliberate. Executions were spaced between other spectacles so that the crowd's excitement never dipped. A brutal death might be followed by a display of exotic animals, then another killing, then a brief musical performance. It was a rhythm of entertainment that numbed the horror, making the grotesque feel almost normal. Ancient historians noted that the cruelty could reach staggering levels under certain emperors. Caligula was said to have ordered the execution of entire groups of prisoners simply to fill a gap in the program when the schedule ran short. Commodus, infamous for fighting in the arena himself, often staged elaborate deaths for his opponents, sometimes personally delivering the final blow to maximize the crowd's thrill. And yet, for all its brutality, the system worked as intended. The people kept coming. They cheered. They gossiped about the cleverest executions. They debated which emperor staged the most impressive shows. The condemned became nameless actors in a state-run performance, their pain woven into the empire's fabric of control. This was the Colosseum's true genius, not in its architecture, but in its ability to turn death into a shared cultural experience. And it is here in the intersection of spectacle and suffering that we find the most haunting stories. One of them belongs to a man whose final moments would become one of the most chilling legends of the Roman arena. His name, according to the fragmentary accounts that survive, was Marcus Attilius, not the celebrated gladiator of the same name, but a condemned prisoner whose fate was sealed long before he stepped into the arena. His crime was insurrection. Along with a small band of fellow slaves, he had attempted to flee an estate on the outskirts of Capua. For most, the punishment would have been a swift execution in private. But in the year of Titus's great games, Marcus's death was deemed worthy of the Colosseum. On the morning of his execution, the city was already humming with anticipation. The emperor had promised a spectacle that would eclipse all others, and whispers spread that the midday program would be unlike anything Rome had seen before. Behind the arena's high walls, Marcus waited in the dim holding cells, known as the carcers. The air was thick with the scent of animals. The lions kept hungry for days, pacing in cages nearby. Chains bit into his wrists, but it wasn't the iron that weighed on him. It was the knowledge that every scream would be for the entertainment of strangers. When the moment came, the gate lifted, and Marcus was driven forward into blinding sunlight. The noise hit him like a physical force, 50,000 voices rising in a single wave. The sand beneath his bare feet was warm, but in places it was sticky, still damp from the morning's fights. In the center of the arena stood a grotesque wooden structure, a mock temple to Diana, goddess of the hunt. Archers dressed as mythical hunters lined its base. Marcus was forced onto a small platform, a rope binding him upright, his chest bare. Performance was to reenact the myth of Actaeon, the hunter turned into a stag and torn apart by his own hounds. But Rome's version had no transformation, only blood. At a signal from the editor of the games, the archers loosed blunt arrows tipped with hooks. Designed to tear at the flesh without killing, each impact sent a shudder through his body. The crowd roared at his grimaces, their laughter mingling with the cries of vendors hawking wine and bread. Then the dogs came. 4 of them, lean and trained for the arena, released from hidden gates. They circled, snapping, driving him against the post. The handlers cracked whips, urging them closer. When the first lunged, teeth closing on his thigh, Marcus's cry was swallowed by the noise of 50,000.
Ow.
Another dog clamped onto his arm, dragging it downward until the rope strained. The scene was carefully paced, not to kill too quickly, but to let the audience savor each desperate struggle. At one point, Marcus managed to kick a hound away, the crowd gasping in collective thrill. But the brief moment of defiance only prolonged his suffering. From beneath the arena, a hidden panel opened, and a lion emerged, its mane bristling, its eyes locked on him. The dogs scattered, the handlers retreating to the shadows. There was no rush now. The lion padded forward, muscles shifting beneath golden fur, as if aware of the role it played. Marcus, his strength failing, lifted his head toward the emperor's box. The sunlight caught his face, and for a heartbeat the crowd saw not a criminal, but a man defiant, unbroken, even at the edge of death. It was the last moment of silence before the end. The lion lunged, and the arena erupted in a roar to match the beast's. When it was over, sand bore new stains, darker than before, and Marcus Attilius was another name lost to history, except to the few who whispered it. Remembering not his crime, but the way he faced the empire's judgment without bowing. For Rome, it had been a successful performance. For Marcus, it was the price of defiance. And for us, 2,000 years later, it is a window into the machinery of fear that kept an empire standing. Marcus Attilius's death was not an accident of cruelty. It was the result of a system, one meticulously designed to maintain the Roman Empire's grip on its people through a blend of spectacle, fear, and propaganda. The Colosseum was more than a building. It was the beating heart of this system, a place where political control was exercised, not behind closed doors, but in the full view of the masses. The genius of the games lay in their dual function. On the surface, they were entertainment, free to all citizens, a gift from the emperor. This generosity bought loyalty. When the people were fed Panem bread and dazzled with Circenses circuses, they were less likely to question the injustices of the state. But underneath, the games were an instrument of intimidation. By watching a man like Marcus die in such a public, humiliating way, the audience absorbed a simple truth. No one defied Rome and lived. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The condemned were often chosen not just for their crimes, but for the message their deaths could send. A rebellious slave. Show the city what happens to those who disrupt the order. Political dissident? Turn his punishment into theater, so his ideals die alongside his body. Even the elaborate mythological reenactments carried hidden meaning, by aligning executions with stories of divine punishment. The state suggested that its will was as inevitable and righteous as the will of the gods. The system was self-reinforcing. The more the crowd saw, the more they expected. Emperors competed to outdo one another with grander, bloodier spectacles, knowing that public favor could be won or lost in the arena. The populace, in turn, became complicit. They cheered, laughed, and called for more, their participation legitimizing the violence. In this way, the games blurred the lines between victim, executioner, and spectator, making cruelty a shared cultural norm. From a modern perspective, it's tempting to dismiss this as the brutality of a bygone era. The mechanisms are disturbingly familiar. Even today, states and leaders understand the power of public spectacle, whether it's through mass rallies, televised trials, or militaristic parades. The tools may have changed, but the principle is the same. Control perception, and you control behavior. The Colosseum was Rome's stage, and every drop of blood was part of the script. Marcus's death was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated scene in a centuries-long performance. By stripping him of dignity, turning his final moments into a story for the crowd's amusement, the empire didn't just kill the man. It killed the idea that any individual could stand against its will. This is why these spectacles were so dangerous. They normalized cruelty, teaching people to see suffering not as a tragedy, but as entertainment. Once that transformation is complete, the leap from spectator to participant is alarmingly small. In the end, the Colosseum didn't just break its victims, shape the moral compass of an entire society, one roar of approval at a time. The sand of the Colosseum swallowed Marcus Attilius, just as it had swallowed thousands before him. By nightfall, the arena floor would be swept clean, the blood raked into the soil, and preparations would begin for the next day's show. In Rome, death was temporary, not for the victims, but for the memory of them. The machine demanded constant fuel, and the crowd's appetite was insatiable. For the spectators leaving the Colosseum that day, Marcus's death was just another scene in the grand pageant of empire. They might recall the way he stood against the lion, or the way the dogs tore at him. But by tomorrow, his name would be forgotten. What mattered was the thrill, the shared roar of the crowd, the intoxicating sense of unity in witnessing another's destruction. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling part. The Colosseum didn't simply kill people, it erased them. It replaced their humanity with a role: victim, villain, sacrifice. And once the role was played, it was discarded. The state could do this because it had mastered something more dangerous than the sword: the narrative. Rome told the story, Rome set the stage, and Rome decided the ending. It is here that we face a question that reaches far beyond the ancient world. How much of what we accept as entertainment is, in fact, a tool for shaping our beliefs? In Marcus's time, the message was clear: Rome is eternal, and resistance is futile. But today, in our own arenas, the screens, the feeds, the broadcasts, are we really so different? Do we not still gather in massive numbers to watch the rise and fall of individuals, to cheer at their triumphs and jeer at their downfalls? Marcus's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The spectacle only works because we choose to watch. Without the crowd, the Colosseum is just stone and sand. Without our attention, the modern equivalents would crumble. The question is, why do we keep watching? 2,000 years ago, Rome perfected the art of making cruelty feel normal. And once something feels normal, it is nearly impossible to undo. If we can look back at the Colosseum with horror, perhaps we should also look around us with suspicion. What stories are we being told? Who is writing them? And more importantly, who benefits from us believing them? Marcus Attilius died defiant, but his defiance was buried with him. The crowd went home entertained. Emperor's power went unquestioned. The cycle continued. So, was justice ever the point? Or was it always about control? Next time, we will step away from the lion pits and into another chamber of horror. Not under the open sky, but in the cold, shadowed halls of the medieval Inquisition. Here the weapons were not claws or fangs, but iron, rope, and fire. And the cruelty, some would argue, was far more intimate.